Welcome to the Conscious Economics Podcast. I'm your host, Rhiannon Roseland. I'm a serial entrepreneur and social innovator. I like to gather people from all different walks to talk about what I call the conscious economy. I believe that we can create a more equitable system, one that honors the well-being of people, the well-being of the planet, the well-being of business, and includes art and creativity. Join us each week as we tackle a different intersection of this big but critical conversation. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Conscious Economics Podcast. I am your host, Rhiannon Roseland, and I'm back with our in-house financial therapist, Aseel. And so, Aseel, what do you have for us today?
Well, Rhiannon, when I was looking back at some of the episodes we've done recently, we focused a lot on understanding some of the outflow of money, talking about like impulsive spending, talking about some of the emotions that drive our behaviors and what we do with money once we have it. But we haven't really explored how we get money into our life and the energy of inflow of money. So I thought today it's really interesting to explore the energy of money. And by that, I mean the cycle of money, because it's not just about what we do with money once we have it, but it's also all these things that contribute to how much we have of it to begin with, and all these intricate emotions that are probably complex, but we're here to decipher them.
Okay, I'm excited to talk about this. I don't really know how to talk about this. How would we start understanding the energy of money?
And I do agree with you that it tends to be more of a abstract area, but I will guide us through some things to think about and then bring in some practical tools for you to explore. And first, let me tell you why this is important. So there is something called mental accounting, and mental accounting, it refers to the concept that we don't really treat money the same way. So for example, $100 that you make from a full-time job is treated very differently from like $100 that you get from a gift or a bonus, or if let's say you're a waitress, $100 in tips is differently treated than $100 from your like base salary. So that means even though $100 is $100 in our mind, though, we have mental accounting because we treat this money differently given the source it comes from.
Yeah, that is so true. I can reflect on getting actually like gift money for me, especially if it's coming from, family member or something like that. I feel like I want to be so much more mindful of what I do with that money because it was given to me for a specific purpose. Whereas if I just like earned it on my regular paycheck, I may not think about it as sentimentally.
Interesting. Some people stay the way around because gift money is easy. It just came probably unexpectedly in some cases. Then they may actually have more impulsivity in how they spend it and careless behaviors with it. So easy come, easy go type of behavior. So there's different ways in how people react to these things. So my invitation to the listeners is to reflect on the different sources of money that are currently coming into your life. So most likely it's usually your job. And if you have investments, sometimes like if you have a rental property or investments that generate an income, sometimes there's maybe a side hustle that you're engaged with. Other sources of money could be maybe if you have support through the government or support through family members. There's all sorts of different ways in which money comes into your life. And sometimes it's like winning the lottery or having unexpected amount. And it's worth to just sit and reflect on how do you feel about these different sources of money that are currently active in your life, and also reflect on how you use this money differently and distinguish how these behaviors are now different based on the income source. And the interesting thing about this as well is a lot of people are stuck in jobs they hate. I mean, rarely do we see people who are fully employed in jobs or companies they fully feel engaged with. And this is something that we talk about in different episodes. And what I find interesting about people like that tend to be really good hard workers and really want to work. It's not that they hate the concept of work, they're just not aligned where they find themselves to be right now. And what happens is that there's some sort of resentment towards the very source of money in your life. Like you feel like now you're enslaved because you need the money. Most people don't make changes because they are dependent.
They get stuck in a cycle. Yeah,
exactly. And it creates such a complex relationship with money, because you hate that money is forcing you to be stuck in that situation that you don't feel is has an easy out to it. 100%. So these are people that tend, I mean, there's no, we are very nuanced, and not two people in the same position will react the same way, but a lot of people who tend to be stuck in jobs they hate usually overspend to numb the feelings and the resentment they're actually harboring being in this position.
Which then only perpetuates the problem further, because then you're further away from being able to make a change about it, which is so interesting. Yeah. And I reflect on, so many examples actually. There's obviously people like, I know I grew up in a household where it felt like my mom couldn't leave an abusive relationship because of money, or that was the story, the belief that was there. And so that definitely put an interesting feeling inside of me around that exchange, and just the idea of having to rely on a partner financially. So even at times when I was pregnant or going through these things, I felt very driven to still continue to like keep my career going full speed ahead because of maybe that fear of being worried about what it would feel like to rely on someone else, because I had a negative program around that. But it's interesting around the resentment piece and people, resenting the money that they earn because they don't enjoy the job that they do. And I think that this comes back down to this cultural conditioning where I remember going through school and it was just like, you go through school, you do well, and then you get a job. You get a job. It's a good job if it pays you well. No one ever talked about being fulfilled. No one ever talked about, personal alignment. It was just like, that's the goal. And then once you're there, like, you just rock that out for the rest of your time and like hang on to your hats, and that was sort of what was conditioned into us. So I think only now we're starting to talk more, especially in the younger generations, about this idea of purpose and passion in our work. And I feel like sometimes that can sound kind of fluffy or frou-frou, like, wouldn't you be so lucky to be able to pick something like that? But I do think that you can actually earn more when you are feeling more aligned and 100%.
Of course, like this whole reflection on the flow and the energy of money is really the overarching question is your money creation in integrity with your unique gifts and the energy that you put out? Is it in alignment with your values? So is the money coming in valuing who I am as a person, and is the money coming out valuing what I deem to be important in my life? So these are really, really important questions, because money is a form of expression. And one of my favorite episodes that we've done before is teaching people about the different currencies that they have, and like the energy behind all these different currencies that we have access to, because it's really tapping into this abundant mindset. So once we actually view money as energy, then we're expanding our understanding of it, and we're really building a different relationship with it, rather than just the dollar and cents it's usually treated in our society. To do a little bit of segue on this topic, one of the recent conversations that I was really interested in, I belong to a community called the Trauma of Money community, one of my favorites. It's run by this amazing woman in BC, Chantal. And Chantal recently started a conversation about creating sliding scales for individuals who would like to incorporate sliding scale pricing in their practice. If there's therapists or coaches or, different types of practices, anybody who's an entrepreneur. And this, started a series of conversations between people who've always been interested in about decolonizing their services, making it accessible, but it's also like this, like, how do you go about it? And so the first, like, I missed the session, but I heard the recording. So it's different people from different walks of life engaging in this topic. And I thought this was a really cool thing that we can also discuss in this episode for two things. First of all, if you are interested, if you're a professional interested in adopting this in your field, but also if you're a client who feel that you may benefit from this and getting into this creative way in which we price the value of these services that we engage in.
Well, and also just thinking about the barter exchange model as well. So I know that both of us have explored this where like I can give a service or I can give a particular contact or a favor in exchange for something else. And I think that is very new economy as we move into exploring multiple currencies. The other thing that I think about when I think about the energy of money and maybe the different ways that we categorize or associate. So I associate putting something on my credit card different than if I pay with my actual debit card, like directly from my account, even though I'm going to pay off my credit card with that same money.
Mental accounting.
Yeah, it's a mental accounting. So for me, like a more personal item, I would choose to put on my debit card immediately. Like, and by personal item, I mean like I was buying something like a gift, let's say for you, for your birthday. I feel like I would put that on my debit card, but then on my credit card, I would put like, you know, an Uber or, you know, a meal here.
Things
and there,
that are less
like
personal.
Things that are less personal, which is really interesting because it's all in the end coming out of the same account. There's just like a small delay because I try to pay my credit cards off monthly. So it's really only a couple of weeks difference, but it's just so interesting. I've never really reflected on that until just now because you brought this up.
I wonder why. That's like, that's different and unique. I've never heard that before. And I do wonder why that is. And it's worth exploring further. Like, what are some of the associations you have with a debit card versus a credit card? Because sometimes a credit card is a source of fear and shame and guilt to some people. So they tend to like use it only for purchases they're not necessarily proud of, or you know, there's no way around it, and use their debit card for everything else. I personally use like my credit card for everything. And that's strictly because of points. Like it's just a utilitarian approach.
There, you know exactly what it is.
Exactly.
And then, but no, it's really, really interesting. I don't have a negative association with the credit card. But again, I haven't had lots of credit trouble that way. It's like one thing that I didn't get to of all the other things that I've done. But it is really interesting to kind of reflect and think about that. And I also think about, again, like coming back to the idea of, for me, if I received a financial gift from a family member or someone, I feel almost like I don't even want to spend it, or I want to spend it in a very, very specific way, almost a more sentimental way. But I think growing up in my household, that was very rare. Like I paid my way through school. I did these kinds of things. So like getting actually like a financial gift from someone, that's like very, very big deal for me. So I think about it differently. It's not like expendable. It's like someone like really worked hard to give this because it wasn't so affluent and it wasn't so easy for family members to do that.
That's really good to reflect on that.
Hold that thought. We have a quick word from our partners before going back to the episode. This podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, RBC Investies. Backed by expert human advisors, RBC Investies is a smart, online, automated investment service that allows you to invest with low effort and low cost.
Open your first RBC Investies account and pay no management fees for your first year. Plus, start investing with as little as $100. Simply visit rbcinvesties.com/getinvesting and sign up using promo code AA407.
And now back to the episode.
Some questions I've prepared here for us to explore. And this is something I also really recommend that you sit down and ask yourself some of these questions and how it shows up in your life. Because we started this episode by talking about how abstract the concept of the energy of money can be. But when we anchor it with some practical questions, we can then see how it really is very relevant and really applicable to our day-to-day. So some of these questions are, like, what energy am I giving to bring money into my life? Like, because it's a value exchange. It's an energy exchange. So what energy am I giving, and is that energy in integrity with my unique gift? So going back to the different sources of money that can come into your life, reflect on now the energy that this money has attached to it. So if you have here's an example. I had a client, for example, who had a really good rental property. And by good, I'm referring to strictly the financial potential of that property. However, the client resented that property because of all the headache it causes her. The difficulty of tenants she happened to attract, and all these different things that she and I spent some time really deciphering. And at the end, I told her, it's no surprise to me that you're irresponsible with this money that she came to me knowing like I have an issue. I'm not being responsible with my money. And I'm like, it's not, given everything you've shared with me, you really have so much emotion, negative emotion attached to that property. She also felt forced to buy it earlier on in her life. Her parents felt that this is the right way to set her up for financial success, versus she actually wanted to travel with that money and not tie it into a property.
So interesting.
So she had all this negative association. Like she saw that property as a price she had. It was the price of her freedom. And that was all the emotional intensity entangled with that property.
So she just wants to blow it.
So she just wanted to blow it.
Wow.
Even though the intention of that property was to set her on the right financial path. But this is how important understanding the emotions we have and the energy we have behind the money can really help us understand why we behave with money the way we do. And chances are it's not just the lack of our financial literacy. Most of us know we need to save more than, spend less than we earn in order to save and invest for our future. These are fundamentally understood by most of us. But translating that into reality, there's emotions in the way and complex things that we really need to decipher here.
That's so interesting. That's such an interesting example. I feel like in my life, although there was financial struggle, money still seemed to like come easily to me. I started a business when I was very young. So I started earning money at like 10 and 11 years old. So I just got this sense that I could earn money, or that it was something that I was able to do. Therefore, I could spend money because I knew how to earn it. And I still kind of carry that vibration towards it. So like I know it if I want to start something, or if I want to get a particular project off the ground, I can usually figure it out. Like I'm pretty resourceful that way, but then I may not be so resourceful around how I allocate it once it comes in. I'm just like paint everything with a pretty broad brush and like take a lot of risk, and I'm not so finite on details. So I'm just reflecting on that. And it's interesting now, I'm thinking further around this idea of if what you are doing in exchange for your income is something that you resent and you don't like, then you can't really gain abundance from that, because you're constantly pulling on this part of you that feels already drained. So I think it's interesting, like, we're asking all of you that are listening right now, has anyone ever changed to a job that they preferred more and then actually ended up getting a raise faster, or like being in a new income threshold in a more quick way once they were doing something that felt more aligned?
Yeah, one of the questions I ask, actually, it's a really interesting question. What is the price that you pay right now to bring this money into your life? And I actually like to, when I coach clients around this topic, to actually have two separate categories. One that is exclusively financial and one is non-financial. So what is the cost of this money? And I actually remember doing the social media post about how some of our income costs too much. And it's at first you're like, what is this? How does this even make sense? But when you look into what I mean by that, the cost, some of it be like the straightforward financial parts is like, for example, if you work in a place, it's maybe the cost of the commute to get there, the cost of the clothes you have to wear to childcare, all these different additional things that you incur to maintain that job. People don't think about it from that angle. But the non-financial if there's any health or relationships that are being deteriorated as a result of you having that job, or any of these things that are also struggling or being impacted on some level, this is also a cost that has to be factored in. It's so important for it to be factored in.
We never consider that, but I think about when you are unhappy at work and you spend so much of your life at work, you are in a cranky mood when you come home. You don't feel like socializing. You don't feel like maybe taking care of yourself in the same way because you're just in that cyclical kind of drained energy.
Yeah.
So that is really, really interesting to think about. And I know so many people, friends of mine, that are stuck in these jobs that just cause them so much stress and anxiety. In the end, what is it really worth? I also think I always say this, but I think it takes a toll on your physical body, your sensuality, your sexuality. Like, these are things that I have traded in for work because of the sheer stress and volume.
Yeah.
And just not being able to be embodied,
of course,
when you're doing that.
100%. So one good way to start concluding this episode would be, so now you reflected on the different incomes in your life, and you've reflected further on the energy attached, and you realized some of it could be potentially negative. Now what? Obviously, a lot of these concepts can be frustrating sometimes because you're like, okay, but I'm still stuck in this reality. I have to feed my children. I have to pay my rent. I have all these financial obligations and responsibilities to meet up to. Like, what is this information going to help me now that I just realized my situation is probably even worse than I thought, because now I'm putting attention into it and realizing these things. So it's a valid point, and this is why this journey is not linear, and it's not necessarily meant for us, now that we realize this, that means the solution is just around the corner. It is a process, and that's where we have to be very compassionate with ourselves. But the second we understand how this energy and the flow of money in our life is truly impacting us, we can make intentional decisions to start shifting. And there's so many different ways in which we can make the intention to change our situation, even if it's not immediate. And it can start with little things. We had in another episode how the radar and the percentage of happiness, only a small part of it is actually attributed to our life circumstances, but the bigger percentage is about our attitudes and beliefs around that. So one of the first things, so even when I realized I hated my job, and I knew I couldn't leave right away, I had a lot of obligations that prevented me. I started actually having to make peace with my job, having to make peace with why I'm there, and starting to actually write a gratitude letter to my job every day to shift some of the energy in that immediate moment. And ironically, this is what opened the door for me to what was next. And for me, it was mustering the courage to actually leave it and start my entrepreneurial journey. I couldn't have, and I shouldn't have left my job when I'm feeling resentment towards it. It was really when I shifted into a more open, inspired place that I walked into my next steps inspired by what's next versus grudgingly hating where I am. And this is the risk a lot of us fall into when we hate where we are and we make decisions hastily based on that. Then we're actually motivated by the wrong reasons.
And then we could end up just in the same situation somewhere
Usually,
else.
yes.
And
usually it's a
people
cycle.
just make that lateral move because we haven't actually changed what's going on inside. So I think that that's such a great tip and such an interesting topic and episode. So to find out more, go to consciouseconomics.ca. You can sign up for free to become a member, find out about all the cool events and things that we're doing to help people explore these topics and more. The economic healing sessions that are offered monthly by the lovely Aseel, where she will actually coach you individually to help you uncover some of these blocks. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you again next week on the Conscious Economics podcast.
Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by CPP Investments. At CPP Investments, they never lose sight of the long term. They invest the Canadian Pension Plan Fund to help provide financial security for generations of Canadians.
They diversify the CPP fund across geographies and asset classes to access the best investment opportunities and generate sustainable long-term returns. The fund is now more than $400 billion.
To learn more about their investment performance for Canadians, visit cppinvestments.com.